Even though he is retired, Colonel John B. Alexander still works today at Los Alamos National Laboratory in a capacity that is not clearly defined, as does NSA General Michael Aquino. Both personalities have extensive study in the application of non-lethal, extremely low-frequency weapons in attacking the populations and armed forces of enemy nations. Whether these terrible weapons that were supposed to have been turned against our implacable enemies have instead been turned against our very own people is difficult to prove given the nature of the weapons involved. Thousands of American citizens have been publicly claiming for years that they are under attack from a directed energy weapon that attacks their physical bodies and their central nervous systems. Hundreds of websites have sprung up on the internet, and these distraught and tormented people have banded together in numerous groups seeking redress and relief from their elected representatives. They have brought legal cases to trial in both the United States and in international forums on human rights. Human rights activists have been besieged by them for help, but all such petitions and court cases have run up against the problem of lack of physical evidence. The entire judicial system is built on the concept of physical evidence, and people who are being attacked with invisible bullets are left with none. The very few instances of physical evidence within their grasp are easily countered by the government and can be suppressed or confiscated merely by going before a judge and repeating the most abused phrase in the English language: "This is a matter of national security." All physical evidence, paper trails, all crimes, foreign and domestic, are obscured in secrecy by hiding behind the system of classification and public lies. It must be remembered that the human radiation experiments began in 1943 and became public knowledge only when the government allowed it to be released to the public in 1995, and this was ostensibly to exonerate the guilty parties and to placate the victims. It is with this in mind that you should look at the extensive circumstantial evidence. The U.S. government has a long history of experimenting on human beings, not just the radiation studies, but many different programs of experimentation on unknowing and unwilling human beings. In every instance, these conspiracies were carried out more or less in public for decades without serious challenge. The Tuskegee syphilis study was one such well-known example of a terminal experiment on a large group of human test subjects. Hundreds of African-American men who had become infected with syphilis were allowed to die a slow and terrible death so that the pathology of the disease could be better understood. These men suffered horribly for decades, eventually going blind and then insane. The men also passed their illness on to countless other innocent people unnecessarily. The scientific results were written up and published in the most prestigious medical journals in the country by the most preeminent names in medicine. This state of affairs continued from the 1930s until the 1970s, before one single protest was lodged by a medical professional. In the end, this well-known crime of Tuskegee was also papered over, and no one was punished. MKUltra mind control experiments began at the end of World War II and became public in the 1970s, however imperfectly, and went black again because of Senate hearings, but these experiments have continued to this day. The only reason that MKUltra was ever brought into the light of day was that a dissident group stole government documents and released them to the press, which initially refused to publish them. The MKUltra archive was destroyed because of the seriousness of the crimes perpetrated by the intelligence community. If it had become public knowledge that the intelligence agencies had allowed Nazi war criminals to experiment on American citizens, including children, and then replicated these techniques themselves, the damage to their reputation could never be undone. The only aspects of CIA criminal activity in general, or MKUltra in particular, that the intelligence community ever admitted to were the ones that were already public, or details that had very little to do with the current capacities of mind control weapons and techniques. Microwave weapons and remote influence of the human central nervous system are the crown jewels of the intelligence community. It should be noted that documents dating from World War I, such as the formula for invisible ink, are still classified, and that no serious secrets have ever been or ever will be willingly divulged. What did become public was only the tip of the iceberg, because mind control techniques and related technology work well. Human beings can be made vulnerable to manipulation and can be used unknowingly in intelligence operation. The technology that has evolved is very powerful. In fact, it is the ultimate weapon, and the penalty for revealing these secrets is false imprisonment and assassination. For any new weapon system, it has always been necessary to test it to refine and perfect the weapon, whether chemical, biological, or nuclear, or in this case microwave and radio frequency radiation weapons. Human beings have been used to perfect nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons by both the United States and its enemies. These experiments have historically been carried out both in times of war and in times of peace. The only proof of human beings ever being used as experimental subjects in the development of microwave non-lethal weapons was from captured Japanese documents at the end of World War II. Their civilian scientists had used prisoners of war in the laboratory. The POWs were cooked to death through microwave heating in terminal experiments. To obscure the truth, the scientists referred to the test subjects as monkeys in their lab notebooks. The truth emerged only because Japan was a defeated power, and their biological, chemical, and microwave weapons programs were confiscated by the U.S. Navy. To illustrate how it is especially necessary to use human test subjects, we will examine one facet of the arsenal of these non-lethal weapons. Cyclotronic resonance refers to the ability to resonate or spin small particles with a given resonance frequency. Military doctrine for non-lethal weapons in this area is as follows. Initially, enemy armies or populations can be exposed to, sprayed with, a very small amount of chemical or biological agent. The quantity of chemical or biological agent used may be so small as to be virtually undetectable. Following exposure, the enemy population may be targeted with microwave or radio frequency radiation in the exact resonance frequency of the chemical or biological agent used. The toxic agent will begin to resonate or spin and will react with much greater speed or activity within the bodies of the target population, similar to the behavior of enzymes that make life possible. This greater reactivity may be millions of times greater than normal and would behave as if the person had been given a massive dose of chemical or biological agent, enough in fact to cause death. Cyclotronic resonance of chemical and biological agents allows entire armies or populations to be destroyed with only minute amounts of the agent in their bodies if they are attacked with non-lethal microwave weapons afterwards. It will be impossible to develop and deploy such a weapon without first testing it on human beings. These tests are actually being done on American citizens in their own homes. This is just one aspect of the non-lethal weapons testing that is being done on several thousand people across the United States. The case for proving that these crimes against humanity are happening to several thousand American citizens rests on the 7 facts put forth here. First, it is an historical fact that human beings have been used as experimental subjects by the United States government in the past, and that these crimes continued for decades without interruption or detection by the general public. Many of these various programs that used human beings as guinea pigs were carried on, as in the case of Tuskegee, virtually in the open. Besides the human radiation experiments on civilians and armed forces personnel, it is an historical fact that the government funded MKUltra mind control experiments for decades using Nazi war criminals and American scientists in an effort to perfect mind control as the ultimate weapon. Second, all new weapon systems must be tested in order that they be perfected, especially non-lethal microwave and radio frequency radiation weapons. This is the history of nuclear, chemical, and biological warfare, and all weapon systems that predate them. Third, the body of unclassified scientific research by American and Russian scientists exists, including patents, to such a sufficient detail to prove that these weapons do exist. The documented Russian directed energy weapons program included attacks on the U.S. Embassy that killed the U.S. ambassador, as well as a USSR program that targeted internal dissidents with anti-personnel microwave weapons, such that they might, quote, give their will over to some superior outside force. 4. There is a history of prior criminal behavior against progressive groups, criminal acts perpetrated by the U.S. intelligence agencies that date back to the 1950s and continue to this day. These criminal operations, exemplified by COINTELPRO, have adopted counterinsurgency warfare techniques that included assassination and forced suicide as a primary tactic against individual American citizens to stop mass movements from forming or to stop progressive groups from successfully advocating for social change in a lawful manner. 5. U.S. military doctrine is highly evolved on the subject of non-lethal weapons. These weapons have been fielded and used in warfare for decades, but their use has remained classified. The non-lethal weapon systems that the public is aware of are only those systems that are of the most benign in nature and will not create a public backlash. The use of the more sinister